Mother's Day. Stephanie, thanks for making it. How was your Mother's Day, Stephanie? Robbie, Robin, Amy, Hall, good to see you guys. I hope you've had a lovely day. Timmy's had an amazing day. Timmy met more schnauzers in a short space of time than he ever has in his whole life. In fact, I don't know if he's ever seen so many dogs together, like in one go, ever. So he really was in his element. So although it's not like Father's Day or Doggy's Day, he definitely had an unusually memorable and happy day. I'm going to still put some of the video I took on Instagram. Hopefully I'll remember to do that. Axie, good to see you. Stephanie, what did you guys do today? What did your family make you something? Did you do something together that was different? Did you do nothing for a change? What was different? I suppose it takes a while to type out. So Stephanie asked me to bring some of these pieces of shingle that I got when I was in Nuenen, right? Timmy's giving it a bit of a sniff and a lick. Yeah, so when I went to the Netherlands in 2019, May 2019, I went to Nuenen, and that's obviously where Van Gogh's parents lived, and we spent some time there. And so I met a guy who was sort of a municipal official there, and he gave me these, what appear to be pieces of stone. Here's another one. Here's another one. You can see it's very flat, and it's actually very light. It looks heavier than it is. It actually feels incredibly light. So I've got sort of 3 of these sort of pieces. And then I've got this as well, slightly different color. I guess this used to be brick, part of a brick. And this is part of what used to be the roof, I think, of the church that Van Gogh painted, or the church that his father belonged to. But it's some building that he painted that it was since demolished. And so it was quite a nice feeling to be able to bring something tangible, to take something tangible home. And so in a weird way, just holding these shingles, it's like traveling through time. These shingles felt the cool, wet, windy, grey weather that of the Netherlands that Van Gogh would have experienced. And if only they could talk, what did they see from that roof when Van Gogh was sort of walking to and fro? So just a little bit of something tangible from the Netherlands. Yeah. Stephanie says, my husband made breakfast, my son's got me a card, and my youngest made me an awesome gift and video message. That's cool. Then went to my mother's home to spend time with my sister and her family as well. That sounds good. Yes, I think, I can't quite remember what it was. I think it was a church building that has since been demolished, but it was something that he painted. That this comes from a building that he painted that was since demolished. Amy says, have you been a Van Gogh admirer for some time? Not really. My brother's a full-time artist, and my brother's really been far more into Van Gogh for much longer than me. I've kind of been aware of Van Gogh, and I've kind of had a sort of, obviously, a similar interest to probably most other people. He painted Starry Night, he cut off his ear, he was a troubled dude, and he's a big deal kind of thing, He's a big deal in the art world and in terms of popular art culture, I guess, or something like that. He's kind of like a art celebrity. He's kind of like a high-profile artist. But I never really paid too much attention to it for some reason. It didn't really grab me until I watched Loving Vincent. That really got my attention, because Loving Vincent actually tells the story almost through a true crime investigation. I really didn't expect that. So that was really what got my interest. And then because I investigated it myself through a true crime sort of lens, what are the circumstances around the ear incident? What do we know about his medical records, and what was his medical situation likely to have been? And then also mental health. Was he suicidal? What does his writing and his art show about them? And then I thought, wow, I can actually maybe contribute to this, A, and B, I just found it more and more interesting the more research I did. There's so many movies. Andy Serkis plays Van Gogh in one documentary, and Benedict Cumberbatch in another one, and Willem Dafoe in another one, and just all these interpretations of the same person. I was quite sort of astonished. Wow, so many of these aren't actually, it's like the whole point of this is to capture who this guy was. And I was like, I think you're wrong, And I obviously am getting a lot of that from the folks in YouTube land, where it's like, you have no idea who Johnny Depp really is, or you have no idea who Amber Heard really is. And I mean, I think that's the difference between someone who is good at true crime, not necessarily true crime, but has got good attention to detail in this field, and someone who doesn't. There's a difference between believing something and seeing into something based on all sorts of cues, right? True Jedi Forever. My daughter took Bright Line from University of Miami, and we all just retired to books and sleep. Perfect timing. Oh, that's awesome. That's good to hear. I thought, if there are just 5 of you in chat, I just really want to get this done. I don't want to let my members down. So the fact that there are 15 of you on Mother's Day, that's good for me. Maybe a couple more will join in a little bit later. Do you want to hear about my Mother's Day? Do you want to hear what I did? I'm just going to put a link for you guys so that you can see, and you can follow if you want to. Stephanie, I know, likes to do this. You can follow the letters that we're going to be going through. It's from this link from Web Exhibits. Margaret Zabinski, good to see you. She says, what kind of day did you have? Thanks a lot, Stephanie. That's kind of you. My thoughts were with you, thinking about all who aren't with their mothers. Patty's here, yes, and about Timmy and the schnauzers. So let me start with Timmy, and then I'll talk a little bit about something I did. It just kind of occurred to me that Timmy today, like there were just a bunch of schnauzers, and all the schnauzers are completely different. Some are laid back, some are sort of crossbreeds, some are very sort of carefully manicured and like they've got like these beautiful long beards. Some are like brash, and one of them like just ran headlong into a dam, like just jumped in. Some are sort of shy and conservative, and they sort of stick to their masters. Some are cheeky and aggressive and antisocial. And so in a very quick space of time, he had to figure out where he stood with all of these I was almost going to say people, with all of these animals. And obviously, he's quite a socialized dog, but he's definitely not used to this amount of canines. And it made me think about me covering the Depp case, where you're sort of going into this thing and you're going to be dealing with a lot of people coming from Johnny Depp land kind of thing. And you've never met them before, it's an unfamiliar territory. And so you've got to try and figure them out. You've got to figure out, okay, so this is your attitude, this is your psychology, this is your vibe, this is your approach. Just like a dog approaches another dog and figures out, okay, you don't like me, or you are this way or that way. And so you've kind of got to have that experience, and some of them are negative and some of them are positive. But what are you supposed to do? Not go for the walk and not experience it, or go out and maybe get a couple of your nose snapped on a couple of times and all that kind of thing. And it's just part of that whole experience. So in terms of my Mother's Day, my mom died when I was 17, so about 33 years ago. But I took my girlfriend to lunch because she's a mother, and it was like this mall that we went to. I don't know if I've ever seen it so busy. It was like just a sea of cars. Like often there's sort of got two parking lots on either side of it. Often the one is, if the one is fairly full, the other one is almost always not more than half full. Well, today they were like both pretty much almost at capacity. Like I've never seen it like that. So I kind of said to her, I don't know if we should even bother going to this restaurant. It's probably going to be a queue to get in. And then we sort of lucked out. There was, like one or two open tables. And then we had quite a nice quick meal. And then she then wanted to go to her mother. She'd kind of made two ceramic things. It's sort of made out of concrete or something, but sort of ceramic things. My girlfriend's a mother. She's got two kids. One lives in Canada. Anyway, but they're not my kids. It's not my children. And then she wanted to put the one is like a candle thing, and the other thing is a pot plant thing, and she wanted. So we went to a nursery to get a plant for the pot, and then I bought like a orchid thing, and then that was sort of my gift to her mother, and then so that was the thing. But one thing I did say to her that was quite profound. As soon as I've said this, we can get started with this episode. I just said, I've never been to my mother's grave like since the funeral, and I remember the funeral really well. And it's been about 33 years. And in the same way that I was saying, if these stones, if these shingle pieces that was part of a roof could talk, could whisper, what would they say? What have they seen? How many years were they on this lofty sort of precipice overlooking Nuenen and the surrounding landscape? Obviously my mom's no longer conscious, but, if you just think about some consciousness in the grass there or in the gravestone, 33 years have gone by, wind blowing, the sky moving overhead, day turning to night, turning back to day, back to night, seasons coming and going, month after month, year after year after year, for more than 3 decades. And in that entire time, I haven't gone there a single time. And to be honest, I don't really feel like I need to, in a way. I was just sort of observing that I've never been there. but also saying, I don't really feel like I need to or I should. Meaning, I think about my mother all the time. I don't need to go to a grave to acknowledge her, and I also don't sort of get the feeling she's at her grave. If I need to go and see her, I must go to her grave. To me, she lives in my heart. She lives in my mind. She's part of my memories. But having said that, I nevertheless feel, sort of in a symbolic way, maybe it is important to go there to acknowledge your life in that sense. Do you know what I mean? So it was just a kind of a conversation that we had. Stephanie says, your mom is where you are. I really believe that. Yeah, so it was just like kind of a conversation that we had, and thought it was kind of interesting. Okay, shall we get started? I see we just hit 20. Yvonne Phillips, good to see you. Thanks for that. Okay, so we are now going to get going on the first letter that we're dealing with. If you guys are interested in just some more information, I'm going to put another link. And this link is really taking you to a place called Ramsgate. And so at the same time, so I'm doing the same thing I did last time. At the same time that we're now going to deal with Van Gogh's story from, he's just heard that he's lost his job. He's also just found out that his housemate is dumping him. So although he thought he was having this great experience with Gladwell, and that they agreed on so much, and he kind of thought that he was like this great leader, he was sort of a confidant and a counselor and a guide to Gladwell. It's almost like the opposite. Gladwell's like, you suck, you've lost your job, and also you're really annoying, and I need to just not be with you. And so you can imagine Van Gogh's kind of, his status is starting to fall already. He's lost kind of this kind of friend that he's got. It's been announced that he's lost his job. So he's got something like 3 months to find another job. And the short answer to that is he's going to be looking at ads in the paper every day and responding to them. But at the end of that process, he's not going to get a job. In fact, what he's going to do is get work where he's not paid. So it's quite I think it's 1876. Or is it 1877? Yeah, it's January 1876. I guess the economy was not so great, and so it wasn't really very easy to find work, which is why his sisters went to England, which is why he was heading back to England, even though he wasn't that happy there. He's heading back to England to see if he can make a living, and ultimately he wouldn't be able to. So the journey he was about to take to England, he would actually fail. He would fail to kind of make a living. I think I just want to read the introduction that I put on Patreon. But basically, I'm reading it from Great British Life. And the article reads, I'll just read the first paragraph. The article reads, quote, after 6 years working in a well-paid job for Dutch art dealer Goupil and Key. So in other words, he basically quit that job at 23 years of age, which means he started at 17. So he had quite a nice long run. He worked for 6 years and learned a lot about the art and artists, and a lot of what he learned and what he felt never left him. So that education and that experience never really left him. But Bridget Bauman, good to see you as well. He nevertheless spent 6 years and, working and being a respectable fellow and doing his 9 to 5. And you know what I mean? He was, making it. And he started quite young, and he was, well on his way. And then he somehow blew it. This article says he was sacked possibly for expressing negative views on the art. I think it could have been that he was sort of daydreaming and distracted. He wasn't really focused on his work. I'm sure he may have expressed his increasingly opinionated views on all things. He was becoming this sort of zealot. His philosophy was becoming very kind of fundamentalistic in certain respects. And so just in a general way, Van Gogh was just being himself. He was intense. And that was actually aggravating some of the people around him. They were finding him annoying, irritating, too much sort of to handle, and it was getting worse. And he wasn't just kind of doing his job. He was sort of, his thoughts were straying into other areas. So there was then a 3-month termination period, and so what he did was he applied for jobs over and over again, and he would ultimately fail to land a job in Paris, and ultimately he accepted a position in England, right? And so you can imagine that this was a shock. This wasn't like, oh, I've lost my job, no big deal. This was a shock. I mean, bear in mind his brother's still employed, and his brother would continue to be employed for the next 15 years or so, whereas Van Gogh would never really get a proper job again really in his life. He would never be as respectable in terms of society as he was at this point ever again. And so what you're about to see is him going down this downward spiral, kind of becoming a social failure and becoming someone who's becoming increasingly lonely. And that loneliness would eventually become extreme loneliness, which is what he actually painted. And so you can see it starting here with his housemate basically saying, see ya. And it's a real Charles Dickens-y thing where in this context of kind of decrepitude, although he's this intense dude, he's now about to lose his job, and he's going to have to leave the country even to find work. He kind of makes friends with a mouse. He's been eating so much bread, he's gotten it into his mind that eating bread is what you're supposed to do. Give us this our daily bread. So he's literally taking that literally. And so he's eating lots of bread, and that has attracted a little mouse into his environment. And now it kind of makes friends. This mouse comes along and he gives it some breadcrumbs, and so they sort of hang out. He becomes friends with this mouse, which is very Dickensian, isn't it? So enough about that. Now we're gonna. So I just want you to bear in mind we're starting in January 1876 in Paris, and this is about him leaving Paris and going to Ramsgate. And we know what the outcome is. He's going to get a job that's going to pay nothing, and then he's really going to struggle. He's going to start struggling more than ever. Faticus, thanks a lot. He's going to start struggling more than ever, but he's also going to start experiencing physical deprivation and physical challenges. So if he wants to go somewhere, he's got to walk. He can't afford to take a train or whatever. If he, in other words, he's having to learn to live without, because he's not really earning money. And but he's also going to be experiencing more and more physical hardship. And how do you deal with that? How do you soothe that feeling of fatigue and being worn out? How do you deal with that? And so we're going to get the answer in his letters. So we start with a letter to Theo from Paris, January 1876. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter. Write to me often, for I long to hear from you in these days. Write me at length. Speak to me of your daily life. You see that I'm doing the same. Now, it's quite interesting that quite recently it actually said, tell me about your daily life and I'm going to do the same. In other words, let's not talk broadly about sort of intangible things. Let's try and kind of be practical. It's almost like he's realized I've kind of gone off the rails. Let's keep things grounded in sort of practical reality. He says, what you told me about Box was very interesting, how he arranged his studio and that you go there often. Keep me well informed about those things. Then he says, we feel lonely now and then and long for friends and think we should be quite different and happier if we found a friend of whom we might say, he is the one. But you too will begin to learn that there's much self-deception behind this longing if we wielded too much to it. If we yielded too much to it, it would lead us from the road. So I don't know what road he's on, but he's already talking about being lonely. And instead of talking about the opposite sex now as the one, he's actually talking about male peers as, that could be the one, that could be like my friend kind of thing. And he's also talking about loneliness and, being happier if you find a friend. That's obviously what's going on in his mind. And he's 22 years old, he's almost 23. Anyway, then he says, there is a phrase that haunts me these days. It is today's text. His children will seek to please the poor. And that is, it turns out to be very, not fortuitous, but portentous. That phrase, I think, comes out of the Bible. And what he's getting at is that God's children will seek to please the poor. In other words, if you're a true child of God, you will put yourself in service of the poor, right? And that's kind of his psychology, and that is kind of where he's headed. He goes on to say, and now here is some news. My friend Gladwell is moving. One of the employees of the printing office convinced him to come and lodge with him. For quite a while, he did everything he could to persuade him. So you kind of get a bit of a sense of resentment, a bit of a sense of bitterness that this other employee who he doesn't name has been sort of petitioning his friend to move out, leave your lodgings with Vincent, come and stay with me. And so he kind of blames this other dude for inviting his friend for the fact that his friend leaves him. What I think he's not really acknowledging is, Vincent, maybe you've been a bit difficult to live with. Maybe your intensity, in the same way that Gogh couldn't really handle it, this dude couldn't either. In fact, maybe no one can handle your intensity. And so he says, I know that Gladwell made this decision without thinking about it. So he's kind of like saying, Gladwell didn't actually think about what he was doing. He didn't think about me. He just did it spontaneously. I would actually think that probably he did think about it. Probably did think, this is not working for me. This guy, he's either going to be world famous or he's going to go to prison, kind of thing. This guy is not my cup of tea. And so he says, I know that Gladwell made this decision to move out without thinking about it. And then he says, I regret his departure very much. So, he's not afraid to be honest, to say, I'm not in a good place. This is hitting me quite hard. Then he says, it'll be soon, probably towards the end of the month. In other words, he's going to be moving out quite soon. And then he says this, which is quite charming. For several days, we've had a mouse in our cabin, which is what we call our room. Every night we put bread on the floor for it, and it knows already where to find it. I've been reading the ads in the English newspapers, and I've already answered some of them. Let us hope for success. Now, do you notice he's reading the ads in English newspapers, not French newspapers? So it's almost like he's saying, I'm done here. I'm not going to find a job in Paris. I'm only going to try and find a job in the Netherlands or Belgium. I'm out of here. I'm leaving. I kind of had that attitude in about 2002 in South Africa, where I was like, I'd gone through so many job ads and I was like, I need to get the hell out of this country. If I want to get work, I need to just not be here. And I'm done. I kind of even went on like a national road trip looking for work. And I even put together a business plan. I've actually still got it, and went all over the place. And when I was done, I was like, I need to get out of this country. I need a job. I need a job soon, and I'm not going to get it here. So I don't know whether he was feeling that same sense of kind of anger, but also kind of desperation. You know, I need to get going again. I'll take you through my experience of what he was going through in a bit more detail in a moment, but I want to just get going with his letter. So anyway, he says, kind regards to Ruus and so on, and then your loving brother Vincent, and then we go into the next letter. 2nd of February, Vincent van Gogh to Theo van Gogh. Dear Theo, will you do me a great favor? You know that edition of Anderson's Stories of the Moon, translated by 10 Kate, which costs 15 cents. Could you send me a copy when you have an opportunity? Now just think about what he's reading. Anderson's Stories of the Moon. You know, he's sort of, his mind isn't on the earth. Somewhere else, I think he spoke about wanting a book on fairy tales. Anyway, he says, the box for The Hague in which I shall enclose the parcels will not leave tomorrow. The wonderful father will not reach Eton in time, but send it as soon as you can. Then he writes a little bit more, and then he says, well, boy, what can I do but continue on my way quietly, looking to him, with a capital H, whom we think of when we say, who will show us the right path? So you can tell that in this state of uncertainty, he's kind of lost his job, he's about to lose his pal, his friend, his companion, is like, God, please guide me, kind of thing. You know, not my will, but yours be done, kind of thing. 5 days later, dear Theo, congratulations to you on Father's birthday. That was a beautiful text from you on 8th February. And the text is, faithful is he that calleth you, who also will do it. Faithful is he that calleth you, who also will do it. We ignore what is ahead for our Father and for us, but we can leave that to him, capital H, whose name is our Father and I am that I am. So Vincent's clearly on like a kind of a roller coaster, right? Then he says, today I received a reply from one of my letters, and they asked if I'm capable of teaching French, German, and drawing, and also asked for my photograph. I answered today, as soon as I hear from them again, I will let you know. Now, I think as early as February, so as early as the 7th of February, he got this offer from Ramsgate, if I'm not mistaken. And then I don't think he got a better offer subsequent to that. Anyway, we'll hear more about that as it goes on. Then he says, thanks for the little book by Anderson. I'm glad to have it. It is to be read aloud to a Dutchman, a fellow employee whom I've seen much of lately. Yesterday, I went to an Anglican church. I was very happy to assist again in an Anglican service. So he goes to church and he's actually assisting there. He's doing some sort of formal, like, I don't know if he's a choir boy or an altar boy, but he's kind of making himself available to be of service in some way. He says it is very simple and very beautiful. The sermon was on the theme of the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Many thanks again for the book by Anderson. Yours in haste, your loving brother Vincent. 19 February, so about 12 days later, 1876. Dear Theo, thanks for your last letter and also for the catalogue sent in the last box. Have I thanked you already for Anderson's tales? If not, I do so now. From home I have heard that this spring you will have to travel on business. You will not be sorry for that. I suppose it is a good experience and you will see many beautiful things in your travels. In the next box you will find the Longfellow. Yesterday evening Gladwell was with me. He comes every Friday and we read poetry together. I have not read Hyperion yet, but I've heard that it is very beautiful. I've just read a very beautiful book by Eliot, 3 tales called Scenes from Clerical Life. The last story in particular, Janet's Repentance, struck me very much. It is the life of a clergyman who lives chiefly among the inhabitants of the dirty streets of the town. His study looks out on the gardens with stumps of cabbage, etc., and on the red roofs and smoking chimneys of poor tenements. For his dinner, he usually had nothing but underdone mutton and watery potatoes. He died at the age of 34, and during his long illness, he was nursed by a woman who was a drunkard. But by his teaching and leaning, as it were, on him, she had conquered her weakness and found rest for her soul. At his burial, they read the chapter which says, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And now it is again Saturday evening, for the days pass so quickly, and the time for my departure will soon be here. No answer as yet from Scarborough. Kind greetings and a handshake always. Your loving brother, Vincent. 15 March 1876. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter. Please thank Mauve and his wife for theirs also. I enjoyed it very much. I'm longing to see the 2 pictures by Mauve that are destined for the salon. Perhaps Gladwell will come back to his old room. He used to have my place at the gallery. It's a pretty hard knock that he is being fired and Gladwell is actually going to take over his position and probably even take over his room to some extent. Then he says, are you having gales at The Hague like the ones we are having here, meaning strong winds? Do you know that I will first go to Eton, save for something unforeseen? I think I will leave the 1st of April, perhaps even the 31st of March. So it's already done and dusted. He's going to England on this gig. He says, our parents have written me that you also intend to come to Eton. When do you leave? I hope to have the opportunity to send you the Longfellow before your departure. It is perhaps a good book for a journey. My hour approaches, just 3 more weeks. Now and then I have to remind myself, be patient and meek. So for an intense individual, he's sort of reminding himself over and over again, be patient. He's impatient, he's intense, he's filled with feelings and frustrations, and he's got to say to himself, be patient and meek. Don't be confrontational. Don't be too sort of confident. Just kind of try and be quieter than you want to be. Then he says, Aunt Cornelia has lent me a beautiful book, Kenelm Chillingly by Bulwer Lytton. It is full of beauty inside. The subject, the son of a rich Englishman who does not find anywhere rest and peace in his life, and he tried to find it among the lower classes. Let me read that again. What's the subject of this book that he finds full of beauty? The son of a rich Englishman who does not find anywhere rest and peace in his life, and he tried to find it among the lower classes. Well, where do you think he's about to go? Van Gogh isn't the son of a rich Dutchman, but they are quite well-to-do. His father's a pastor, and they live quite comfortably. They grew up in quite a comfortable way, and got quite good jobs, many of the siblings. And bear in mind, when his father died, Van Gogh inherited money that kept him going for easily a decade or more. So although he wasn't rich, he certainly wasn't poor. He was quite well off, I would say, sort of middle class, upper middle class maybe. And So you kind of got this thing. It's a little bit like Christopher McCandless, Into the Wild, the sort of thing of being not being charmed by commerce and capitalism, and not being interested in the rat race, and not being interested in the pursuit, the sort of culture, but instead actually wanting to subvert it, wanting to to exist in the world and be there for the poor, and to have a pure kind of existence, and a kind of a godly kind of self-sacrificing, to some extent, kind of self-deprecating life, right? And you must bear that in mind when we think about how Van Gogh died, and him saying that he committed suicide. Was that part of that psychology or not? Anyway, he says the son of a rich Englishman will end up nevertheless by returning home without regretting anything that he has done. So he will give up his class, his station in life, and he'll find happiness with the lower classes, and then he returns home and he doesn't regret anything. And that is exactly the journey that Van Gogh takes. You can see he's inspired by this Charles Dickensian stuff. It's also stuff that comes out in Emile Zola's work. That was another book that he read a lot about. Then he says, adieu, a pleasant journey, and I'll see you in my next letter. And that brings us to about 10 days later, the 25th of March, 1876. Dear Theo, at last I'm sending Longfellow's poems. I'm sure the book will become a friend to you. Today I answered 2 advertisements again. I continue to do it, though I get hardly any answers. So although it seems like he's accepted this position, he knows when he's leaving, he's still trying to find something better, but he just can't. He says, my time here is drawing to a close. You will see many beautiful things on your travels. Though love of nature is not everything, it is still a precious possession. May we keep it always. That's quite an interesting comment as well, because he does keep that sense of loving nature throughout his life. He's always painting the landscape, he's painting trees, he's painting fields, and so on. He's painting the sun over vineyards, and the sun spooling onto mountainsides. And now you will become a guest in many an inn. That is pleasant too sometimes. You know, I once made a trip on foot to Brighton. I always remember it with pleasure. The inns in England are often so cozy. Longfellow describes it so well in Tales of a Wayside Inn. So here he's obviously been reading a lot of this guy Longfellow's poems, and Longfellow, as you can tell by the name, is an English poet, and it's causing Van Gogh to fall in love with England. And I must say, I kind of went through the same thing. As a kid, I read Enid Blyton and Gerald Durrell, and I was just totally in love with England. And when I went there, I was like, okay, where... it's a little bit different being there to this love affair you had through books of England. Then he says, Gladwell has got my place at the gallery and is there already to become familiar with the work before I leave. I've seen several pictures intended for the salon, including 2 beautiful large Gabriels, a morning in the meadows, through the haze one sees a town in the distance, and one of what we call a watery sun. Let's see if I can find that for you guys. Can't seem to find it. I don't know Gabriel's first name, that's the problem. Anyway, then he says there were also two large Xavier de Koks. One represents an evening at the beginning of summer with a meadow surrounded by poplars. In the distance, the farm and fields and a girl driving the cows home. In the foreground, a pool around which 3 cows are lying in the grass, one white, one black, and one red. The sun has set and the trees stand out stark against the light yellowish sky. So do you know what's sort of happening here is the world, his world is sort of transitioning. It's becoming this urban scape, right? The fields and the Arcadia are steadily becoming suburbs and cities. And there's this sense of nostalgia to not kind of progress with the times and instead to go back to Arcadia, to go back to the landscapes, to go back to the fields, to get out of the city, to transplant oneself out of this march of progress, this march of destruction, but also this march of turning the organic folds of the world, the streams, the forests, the hills, the dales, into these fixed lines and grids and structures, these boxes and lines and roads and corridors, these fixed hard places. And there's this sort of yearning to get to the softness of the rural landscape. Do you know what I'm saying? And this was in 1876. That was the feeling in 1876. And I got the feeling J.R.R. Tolkien was born in the same place that I was born in. I got the feeling that Tolkien felt that same sense of nostalgia, that same sense of impending doom, the march of industry, the relentless march of industry. And you kind of see the end result of that in movies like Blade Runner 2049. You see the complete destruction of the natural world. You see the complete destruction of human nature as well. As nature is destroyed, we are destroyed as its caretakers and also as the product of nature. And so to the extent that we can, thanks a lot, Margaret Zabinski, to the extent that we can keep nature healthy and functional and effective and sustainable and all those things, we can keep that with ourselves. But part of that means we've got to care. We've got to care about something beyond ourselves doesn't have a dollar value. Caring for a dog, you don't get something back materially, but you do get something back in terms of the richness of the human experience and of nature. One of the things having a dog helps you to do is feel the turf under your feet, get in touch with your own doggy nature, the ability to look at the ground for whatever. Because dogs get thorns and burrs stuck in their feet and hair, it's a reminder that there is this gritty reality to nature that we were once part of. We once touched leaves with our hands every day and roots and soil, and now we don't. Now we touch plastic, things like that, and keyboards, and we look into blank screens. And if we could see ourselves, we'd be like, wow, you just look at this the whole time. You are static. You are a zombie. You're sort of dying in a way. Where's the vitality? Where's the health? Where's life, kind of thing? And that's kind of what Van Gogh's thinking in 1876. And he's kind of being reminded of this through poetry, through books, through paintings, and obviously paintings that are from almost like an earlier time. Anyway, then he says, I'm riding in great haste, as you can see from the handwriting, a pleasant journey always. So all of these are handwritten letters, 28th of March, 1876. Dear Theo, just one word more, probably the last I shall write from Paris. I'm quite glad to hear that because I want to get on to Ramsgate. He says, I leave you on Friday night and shall be home Saturday morning at the same time as at Christmas. Yesterday, I saw 6 pictures by Michel. How I wish you could have seen them too. Sunken paths through sandy fields leading to a mill or a man going home across the heath with grey skies above. So simple and beautiful. So there is this yearning for a simpler life with less clutter and noise and smoke and all that kind of thing. The beauty of nature instead of the awesomeness of industry. That sort of charging, relentless train that is just going on and on, puffing off into the future. I think the men of Emmaus saw nature in the same way as Michel, and I always think of them when I see one of his pictures. At the same time, I saw a very large picture by Jules Dupré. There's a black marshy soil as far as one can see. On the second plane is a river, and in the foreground, a pool with 3 horses. Both the river and the pool reflect a bank of white and grey clouds, behind which the sun has set. The sky is a soft blue, with some grey, red, and purple at the horizon. One thing I experienced when I lived in England, and I did live in London for a while, was for the first time, I couldn't see the horizon. For the first time, I didn't know where the urban fringe ended and what lay beyond that. And so coming from South Africa, and I must say in South Korea, it was even worse. In South Korea, sometimes you thought it was an overcast day, but it was actually just pollution. So you thought, oh, it's cloudy today, only to realize, wow, it's actually not cloudy. That's just a lot of car exhaust fumes building up to create a grey day, a grey sky. You would go weeks and weeks without actually seeing stars because there's so much pollution. Whereas in South Africa, it's absolutely normal to see stars every night, and not one star, lots of stars. If you're lucky enough to have a farm, and we have a farm, when you go out there, you get to see 10 or 20 or 50 times as many stars because there's just even less light pollution and air pollution. If you climb a mountain, I mean, there are mountains all over the world, but if you climb a mountain, you get even more stars again. But the interesting thing about South Africa is you can often see the physical horizon. It doesn't really matter what city you're in. You can often see the physical horizon. Not quite sure why that is. I don't know if it's because our cities aren't very big or they're not very high, they're not very tall. But you tend to, when the sun goes down, you can actually see the sun going down often. Also, the sky changes color routinely, and it's often quite spectacular. Whereas when you're in Europe, often it's like, is the sun up or isn't it? It's more like light and dark. There's not like this. I'm not saying it never happens, but here it happens as a matter of course. Whereas kind of in Europe, it's like, well, number one, I don't know where the horizon is, and number two, I don't know where the sun is because it's behind clouds or whatever is the case. So I found that just quite interesting, that being in a different country, you kind of got a sense of the movement of the sun, the stars coming out, and things like that. Something else that shocked me was, I think when I came back from being overseas, and I slept in a room in my dad's house. There was just like, is this room inside a menagerie? It's like just birds singing, and it was almost deafening. There were so many birds. Whereas if you go to another country, it's like you're lucky if you see one little bird. Sorry about that. I see I must have reconnected. I'm trying to find a nice picture by Dupree. But yeah, I wonder if this is the one that he's talking about. Anyway, here is a picture by Dupree, and this is the sort of thing that Van Gogh's getting his knickers in a twist over. What does Robbie say? We often have landfill fumes over our town. Oh, that's not nice to hear. Terry Dean says, I live right next to a major highway at the moment, and I feel the constant driving drone actually drinking from my soul, and no stars. It feels so devoid and unnatural. Often when you want that feeling of coming alive, you want to be somewhere in nature, on a beach, somewhere like a luxury game park. It's often, like when you go on honeymoon, don't you go somewhere where it's like a tropical island, or you go skiing, but you do something in nature. That's often part of it. I mean, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard got married on a beach. That was the idea of, paradise. Also for Laurie Vallow and Chair Day Bell. And sorry about this. I'm not quite sure why it's happening. Close some windows. Okay, let's continue with this. He says, I saw these pictures at Durant's Rules, more than 25 etchings after Millet, the same number after Michel, and a great number after Dupré and Corot. All the other artists can be purchased there at £1 apiece. It was tempting. I could not resist the Millet and bought the last three that were to be had after the Angelus. Of course, my brother will get one of them at the first opportunity. Right again soon. Kind regards to that person, and that person, a handshake from your loving brother, Vincent. Okay, and now we go on to 4th of April, 1876. Dear Theo, on the morning before I left Paris, I received a letter from a schoolmaster in Ramsgate. He proposed that I go there for a month without salary. At the end of that time, he will decide whether I'm fit for the position. You can imagine how happy I am to have found something, ! I will have, in any event, board and lodging free. So he's kind of doing cartwheels. He's like, yoo-hoo, I've been offered a job with no salary, and I'm going to be given a month to work, and then you'll decide whether I'm fit for the position. I'm so happy, and I'm going to be able to stay there for free. I'm going to get meals and lodging free. So in a way, he kind of is getting paid. He's being paid in terms of, he doesn't have to pay rent or accommodation, and he gets meals. Then he says, yesterday I went with father to Brussels. We found Uncle Hein in a very sad state. On the train, father and I spoke much about pictures, including the Rembrandts at the Louvre, and the portrait of Burgomaster Six, and particularly about Michel. Wouldn't there be a chance for father to see that book by Michel? If the opportunity arises, don't forget it. I'm very happy to have the chance to see you before I leave, and Lisbeth too. Lisbeth is his sister. As you know, Ramsgate is a little town by the sea. I saw somewhere that there were 12,000 inhabitants, but I don't know any more about it. And now till Saturday, a good journey to you always. Your loving brother, Vincent. Postscript. Gladwell saw me off at the station last Friday night. On my birthday, he came at 6:30 in the morning and brought me a beautiful etching after Chauvel, an autumn landscape with a herd of sheep on a sandy road. So Gladwell has given Vincent a kind of a gift. Maybe he feels a bit guilty. He's taken over Vincent's position and sort of his home, but maybe there was some element to their friendship that meant something to him. In any event, at this point, Vincent van Gogh is 23 years old. He's just turned 23. 14 to 17 April 1876. These are letters from Vincent van Gogh to his parents. Dear father and mother, you have probably received my telegram, but you will be glad to hear some more particulars. On the train, I wrote down a few things and I'm sending them to you so that you will know all about my journey. So yeah, we're getting kind of a blow by blow of Vincent's journey to London and then to Ramsgate. So it's kind of like a diary. So he writes the following. Friday, in thought we will stay together today. Which do you think is better, the joy of meeting or the sorrow of parting? We have often parted already. This time there was more sorrow in it than there used to be, but also more courage because of the firmer hope, the stronger desire for God's blessing. Now, why do you think there was more sorrow in this parting than previously? Why do you think that was the case? When Van Gogh left his family, why do you think there was more sorrow this time? Any thoughts? Mike says, I've been in the most boring flat state in the US, low population. I really can't wait to get out of here after hearing you all. Bridget says, he's a simple man and sees that as perfect with free board and lodgings, and he will feel that he's contributing. You kind of got the same thing when he was in Orvez and to some extent even in All, where he kind of got his accommodation and meals paid for, nothing else. So this is the beginning of that whole thing. Accommodation and meals, that's all he really wants in life for the next 15 years. Robbie Robbins says he was lonelier. Terry says the Van Gogh immersive experience is coming very near me this summer. Are you going? Mike says I got a deal on a couple of cheap homes to flip, South Dakota. So I think the reason why it was quite a tough parting was because his parents have sort of realized you are, first of all, you've lost a really good job. And second of all, you're going off to something that is probably worse, and who knows how this is going to end. And I think that fear was really justified and turned out to be justified as well. Do you know what I mean? It was quite a blow. It was a shock that he'd lost this job. And the question was, are you going to find your feet again? And the answer was, in terms of that, getting a similar job, getting respectability, the answer was no, you're not going to. And that was what made that departure kind of quite emotional, because it was like, you might not come back from this. And the answer is, well, he didn't. Also, Stephanie says he didn't want to be a disappointment, but think about his parents as well. His parents are thinking, jeepers, I hope he doesn't blow this. I hope our eldest son somehow pulls it together, and hopefully, fortune favors the brave kind of thing. But I mean, you could imagine it doesn't look very good. It's already a step down from the sort of work that he was already doing. So he says, And didn't nature seem to share our feelings? Everything looked so grey and dull a few hours ago. So you can just imagine that they're at this train station and it's grey and grim and there's not much said, but there's a lot felt. And there's this pregnant sense in the air of kind of this pregnant sense of doom, which, you know, he was about to begin the sort of misadventure of his life, you know, this tragic journey. For us, it's a triumphant journey in terms of the art that we've gotten through his struggles and through his suffering. But for him himself, you can imagine as his parents, in terms of his life and them wanting him to have their idea of a good and happy life. It was quite a scary thought, and then it turned out not to be a very happy adventure. And just slowly, the whole Van Gogh family from this point onwards would slowly start sort of falling apart. Van Gogh's father would die a couple of years later, but one by one, there would be almost like a domino effect. The father would die, Van Gogh would die, his brother would die, his other brother would die, and so on and so on. You know, one of his sisters didn't get married. I think even maybe two of the sisters didn't get married. So they were at a place of being very functional and happy, and things were going well. This is kind of the turning point. You know, it's like the prodigal son sent off, and is he going to return, you know, a success? Is he going to come back as like the great Gatsby or the great failure, right? So he says, now I'm looking across the vast expanse of meadows and everything is very quiet. And what I want you to try and do is, in the same way that I'm holding these pieces of shingle, which is real, you know, this comes from a real structure in the Netherlands. So where I'm sitting in reality right now, this is a piece that I've taken from the Netherlands, exactly where Van Gogh lived and breathed and did his thing, and his family as well. I want you to think that while he's writing these words, the fabric of reality is passing him. He's hearing the sound of the train on the tracks. He's seeing the landscape passing him by, and it's under this veil of sadness. And he's wondering what it actually portends for him, kind of thing. I mean, look at the words here, but try and visualize it, not just as like, oh, whatever. Try and really turn your imagination on and see what he saw. Try and kind of glimpse the reality that he's painting here. So he talks about, now I'm looking across the vast expanse of meadows from the train, and everything is very quiet. The sun is disappearing again behind the grey clouds, but sheds a golden light over the fields. These first hours after our parting, which you are spending in church, and I at the station and on the train, how we are longing for each other, and how we think of the others, of Theo and Anna and our other little sisters and the brother. Just now we passed Seven Bergen, which means 7 mountains. I thought of the day you took me there, and I stood on the steps at Mr. Provelli's, looking after your carriage on the wet road. And then of that evening when my father came to visit me for the first time, and of that first homecoming at Christmas, Saturday and Sunday. On the steamer, I thought often of Anna. Everything reminded me of our journey together. The weather was clear and the river was especially beautiful, and also the view, seen from the sea, of the dunes, dazzling white in the sun. The last I saw of Holland was a little grey church spire. I stayed on deck until sunset, but then it became too cold and rough. So now he's heading out to sea. At dawn the next morning on the train from Horwich to London, it was beautiful to see the black fields and green meadows with sheep and lambs and an occasional thorn bush and a few large oak trees with dark twigs and grey moss-covered trunks. the shimmering blue sky with a few stars still, and a bank of grey clouds at the horizon. Before sunrise, I'd already heard the lark. When we were near the last station before London, the sun rose. A bank of grey clouds had disappeared, and there was the sun, as simple and grand as ever I saw it. A real Easter sun. The grass sparkled with dew and night frost, but I still prefer that grey hour when we parted. I mean, that is incredibly poetic, and you can tell that all the poems he's read, all the paintings he's studied, all the paintings he's luxuriated in, these scenes, he's starting to do the same. He's trying to write as a poet writes. He's trying to see the landscape as a painter does. And none of that's going to actually leave his heart. You're right, Stephanie, his words are art. None of that is going to leave him. So all of that has already been absorbed. It's just he's got to find a way to express it. What is incredible about all of this is he talks about seeing the sun grand as I've ever seen it, talking about the sunrise being this incredible thing, also the shimmering blue sky and even a few stars still. And then he says, despite all of that I saw, all of these beautiful scenes, I still prefer that grey hour when we parted. Quite incredible, which I think speaks of his sadness and maybe of his fear as well, of the journey that he's about to undertake. Then he goes on, Saturday afternoon I stayed on deck till the sun had set. The water was fairly dark blue with rather high white-crested waves as far as one could see. The coast had already disappeared from sight. The sky was one vast light blue without a single little cloud, and the sunset cast a streak of glittering light on the water. It was indeed a grand and majestic sight, but still the simpler, quieter things touch one so much more deeply. It's almost like he's saying again, despite the roar of the sea and the sunset with this long streak of silver light on the water, he also still prefers that quiet grey hour when he said goodbye to his family. And if you think about it, was it ever going to be the same again? Were they ever going to see him the same way? Were they ever going to be this family unit the way they were then ever again? Was he ever going to experience family, let alone friendship kind of again? And the answer is through his brother, yes, but not really. This was kind of the end of the sort of honeymoon of things are kind of okay. From here, things are going to get hard and harder. He goes on to write, the train for Ramsgate left 2 hours after I arrived in London. That is still about 4.5 hours by train. It is a beautiful route. For instance, we passed one part that was quite hilly. At the base, the hills are covered with scanty grass, and at the top with oak woods. It reminded me of our dunes. Between the hills was a village with a grey church overgrown with ivy, like most of the houses. The orchards were in full bloom, and the sky was a light blue with grey and white clouds. We also passed Canterbury, a city with many medieval buildings, especially a beautiful cathedral surrounded by elm trees. I have often seen pictures of it. You can imagine I was looking out the window for Ramsgate a long time before we got there. So, to me, part of the tremendous power of this narrative in his own words is that we know the end result. We've dealt with the end result in his summer epic in Auvers-sur-Oise. We also know that this fellow who's misunderstood, who's fired, becomes one of the biggest and greatest names in world art history, one of the most expensive artists in the history of art. He becomes an incredibly powerful figure, this small figure in his life moving across the landscape. After his death, his work, his letters, but also his paintings, reach an point of incredible prestige, right? And it's when you see it in that context that I think it's quite compelling. There was someone, I think his name is Steve, who left a comment on one of my videos just saying, I actually cannot believe how boring your Van Gogh videos are. And maybe that's the case if you don't know, if you haven't felt your way around the end result. And I think the same thing that I'm talking about here applies to the Diary of Anne Frank. If you read the Diary of Anne Frank and you took the ending away, or you didn't know the ending, you just sort of read the Diary of Anne Frank, you'd sort of be like, what's this really about? Like, where's this going? I mean, what's the point? And you might toss the book away. But if somebody told you, this is a young girl, Dutch girl, and this is the last thing she writes just before she dies, as a sort of a 14-year-old, 13, 14-year-old. Everything she's writing is like the last experience she'll ever have. This boy she meets and that she likes, it's the last boy she'll meet and it's the last sort of boyfriend she'll have. That meal that she ate. And, you know, as you get closer to the end of the book, everything she's doing, it's the last time she will look through a window, walk through a door, sleep in a bed, eat an apple, all these different things. That's the power of that narrative, the context. And so that is the power of this narrative, is that he doesn't know where he's going, but we do. He doesn't know what the consequences are of certain decisions, but we do. He doesn't know what the implications are of this interest in certain things, but we do. And in some ways, it's magical and amazing, but in other ways, in terms of his life, you've got to acknowledge that it comes with a certain sadness. It comes with a certain tragicness, right? And I think that sadness is really captured in these words where he says, you can imagine, I was looking out the window for Ramsgate for a long time before we got there. So he's traveled quite a long journey, quite a long distance to where he's going in this first trip away from home, away from his last job. Then he says, at 1 o'clock, I arrived at Mr. Stokes. He was not at home, but will be back tonight. During his absence, his place was taken by his son, 23 years old, I think, a teacher in London. I saw Mrs. Stokes at dinner. There are 24 boys from 10 to 14 years. It is a pleasant sight to see them at their dinner. So the school is not large. The window looks out on the sea. Now, if you think about what's going on here, Vincent van Gogh is destined to become a very lonely artist, a guy wandering by himself, misunderstood through the landscape. Where he's going now, he's just crossed the landscape, but where he's going now, he is going to be in a very social setting. He's going to be at a boarding house, the 24 boys, 10 to 14 years. And so it's quite a lively social scenario. It's a busy place to be. There's going to be a lot of chatter and a lot going on, right? And you would almost say that doesn't seem right for Van Gogh. You know, he's a more pensive dude. You know, he's not the right guy to be with kids who are going to maybe poke fun at him or whatever. And you must think about Van Gogh obviously at this point he's a young man himself, he's 23 years old. But in another way, he sort of looks like this. He's sort of got he's sort of a redheaded dude and maybe looks kind of geeky or nerdy or sort of brooding. And now this dude has got to sort of take the helm with a bunch of teenage boys. And he's Dutch, he's not English. How are they gonna respond to him? Are they gonna be kind or are they gonna be cruel? So we're gonna find out. So he says, the window looks out on the sea. After dinner, we took a walk out on the shore. It is very beautiful. The houses on the shore are mostly built of yellow stone in simple Gothic style and have gardens full of cedars and other dark evergreens. There's a harbour full of ships, shut in between stone jetties on which one can walk. And then there is the unspoiled sea, and that is very beautiful. Yesterday, everything was grey. In the evening, we went with the boys to church. On the wall of the church was written, "Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world." So I must say, just reading that gives me the chills. He's come all this way and then he goes into the church, and the church has become so meaningful for him, so powerful. And it's almost like a confirmation when he arrives, these words written on the wall of the church in Ramsgate. Lo, I'm with you, even unto the end of the world. And in a way, he is moving to the end of the world. In a way, he is to the end of his world. In a sense. The boys go to bed at 8 o'clock and they rise at 6. There's another assistant teacher, 17 years old. He, 4 boys and myself sleep in another house nearby. So 6 of them, him and a 17-year-old, remember he's 23, and then 4 boys, they go and sleep in another sort of boarding house. He says, I have a little room that is waiting for some prints on the wall. So again, this idea of, Van Gogh staying at the Revue Inn, and it's a small little room, and was he getting depressed? He was used to living in a difficult situation. He was used to that. And so I don't know what the room was like in Paris, but he's now got a little room. And he put some prints on the wall, and he would go on to do that everywhere he went. He would do that in the little room that he had at the Revue Inn. He would do it in the Yellow House, just to kind of make it feel like it was his. And so everywhere he goes, he puts up artwork. And so you can see how that is going to, if he's lying on his bed looking up at the ceiling and he sees these artworks, you can see what is constantly being radiated at him is art. And now, doesn't he want to radiate something back? Doesn't he want to radiate art back, and have his say? Then he says, and now enough for today. What happy days we spent together. Thanks for everything. Love to all, and a handshake from your loving Vincent. It's the first time that I've seen him use that sign off, your loving Vincent. I mean, the movie is called Loving Vincent. It's the first time so far I've seen your loving Vincent. He says, thanks for your letters. They arrived just now. I shall write soon when I've been here a few days and I've seen Mr. Stokes. Okay. Should we do 2 or 3 more letters now that we're in Ramsgate? So this one is written 14 to 17 April 1876. Letter from Vincent van Gogh to Theo, Ramsgate, 17 April 1876. Dear Theo, I arrived here safely yesterday at about 1 in the afternoon. The first thing that struck me was that the windows of this not very big school look out onto the sea. It is a boarding school and there are 24 boys from 10 to 14 years old. Mr. Stokes is on a trip for a few days, and so I haven't seen him yet. They expect him this evening. There is another assistant teacher, 17 years old. Last night and this morning, we all went for a walk along the seashore. Enclosed is a spray of seaweed. So he actually sends his brother a letter with piece of seaweed. On the waterfront, most of the houses are built of yellow brick in the style of those in Nassau-Laan in The Hague. To use his parlance, he would have said Nassau-Laan and Den Haag. But they are higher and have gardens full of cedars and evergreen trees of somber green. Dikes of stone upon which you can walk protect the harbour, where all sorts of ships are tied up. Yesterday, everything was grey. By and by, I shall go and unpack my trunks, which have just been delivered, and I'm going to hang some prints in my room. The holidays are not yet over, so I've not had to give any lessons so far. I'm anxious to see Mr. Stokes. I must go for a walk with the boys. Adieu always, your loving brother Vincent. And so there's another letter 4 days later from Ramsgate with a sketch. So he's actually drawn a little sketch of what he's seen around him, and I'll put a link to that in the description. I must say I've seen other versions of the sketch that are better than this one. But anyway, it gives you an idea of what he's seeing. Dear Theo, enclosed you will find a postal order of 10 shillings and an advertisement for Anna. Be so kind as to have it put in any paper you think best. If it is not enough, I shall send you the rest, and if it is too much, buy some photographs with it and send them to Eton on May 21st. That's their parents' silver wedding anniversary. But at all events, I think he means in any event, tell me how much you paid for the advertisement and where it was placed, in case I should need to do it again. Today, Mr. Stokes has returned. He is a man of medium height. He is completely bald and wears whiskers. They say that the boys respect him, but they love him just the same. 10 hours after he arrived, they were playing marbles with him. That's quite funny. So you kind of get the sense of this authoritative figure who's nevertheless kind of quite playful. This sort of bald fellow with whiskers, but he's nevertheless seems like he's quite a kind guy. We often go to the beach. This morning I helped the boys make a sandcastle like we used to make in the garden at Zundert. So just to give you a little bit of color, when I stayed in Den Haag, so Van Gogh also stayed in Den Haag for a while. I think I told you guys one day I just got on a bicycle and I rode to the coast. It's basically just going due, what is it, south? Anyway, one particular direction. It might even be, sure, I just can't quite think. Yeah, I think it might even be north. Anyway, I'm not sure, but you're going in one direction and then you get to the coast. And so I went to a place called Sverrenhagen or something like that. I know how to sort of spell it. I can't really pronounce it. But something like Sverrenhagen. And there are sand dunes there. And when I was there, the wind was blowing the grass on these sand dunes. You're quite high above the North Sea. You can't see England on the other side, but England is on the other side. What I also could see built into the big sand dunes on either side were World War II bunkers, sort of D-Day bunkers. And obviously that was built after Van Gogh's time. So I'm just saying, when I was there, I saw the sand dunes, but since he was there, they built these military bunkers in those sand dunes, which is quite interesting. That's just what I saw when I was there. But it's quite a nice wilderness even today. I think I saw some rabbits and squirrels and whatnot over there. Bridget says, collecting seashells is so touching. Okay. He says, I wish you could catch a look out of the windows of the school. The residence looks out on a square. All the houses in the square look the same. It's often the case here. In the middle of which is a large lawn enclosed by an iron fence and lined with lilacs. This is where the boys play at midday. The house where I have my room is in the same square. When I was in Rotterdam and heard that I had a long wait, I was on the point of coming to The Hague. I even went to the station, yet I did not go. Later on, I hope to see everything and everybody there with a calmer eye. I shall never forget leaving those at home on Good Friday. So that is quite an incredible setup, is that he doesn't just leave home, he doesn't just leave his job, but the day that he leaves is Good Friday. So you can kind of imagine that he may imagine in his mind, given just how zealous he is, in terms of the scriptures, that this is divine. What he's doing is part of God's plan. This is this is part of a divine execution kind of thing. And the fact that he's leaving on Good Friday means, even more. What is happening is good. It is meant to be kind of thing. If you think about Easter, it's about resurrection, rebirth, and that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to restart in the world of work as a young man of 23. And so he departs on Good Friday. He says, in the morning we went to church at the Hoover and received communion. Father's text was, arise, let us go hence. Unless I'm reading this wrong, I'm not sure if he's talking about leaving those at home on Good Friday. But anyway, so he says, and in the afternoon we did arise, and from the carriage window saw father and our little brother, that's Gogh, standing on the road looking after the train. And Sunday afternoon I was at the church in Ramsgate. Okay, so that was Good Friday. And there I was struck by the words on the wall, which you'll find in Anna's letter, which I enclosed. So there he's repeating just how meaningful those words were on the wall. He repeats even to his brother, lo, I will be with you even to the end of the world. Compliments to Russ and everybody who may ask after me. A firm handshake from your loving brother Vincent. Okay. Stephanie, how are you for time? Do you want me to read one or two more letters? Stephanie says, shared experiences are even more beautiful. Axie says, I have to go to sleep now, night. Do you guys want me to end here? We just passed 90 minutes, so I suppose I could keep reading. Okay. Let's try and take it to June. I'm not quite sure how many letters are between now and June. Let me just see if I can check quickly. 76. Oh, it's just about 4. So let's just go through 4 more letters. It's interesting. 1880, there are virtually no letters that entire year. 1879, very few letters. 1878, also not that many. So I don't know if that's a sign of good things or bad things, but over the next 3 years, he writes very, very little. And then there's an explosion in 82, 83, 84, 85, then not a lot in 87, and then 88, huge amount of letters, probably the most ever in 1888. When he goes to Al, 1889, while he's in the asylum, also a lot of letters. And then 1890, the last year of his life, a lot of letters as well. So not that many letters this year, 1876. There'll be more letters in 1877, but then from then on, something tells me 1878, 79, and 80 were like kind of shit hard kind of thing. Okay, so dear, this is written from Ramsgate, 28th of April, 1876. Dear Theo, many happy returns, my best wishes for this day. May our mutual love increase with the years. I'm so glad that we have so many things in common, not only memories of childhood, but also that you are working in the same business in which I was till now, and know so many people and places which I also know, and that you have so much love for nature and art. Mr. Stokes has told me that he intends to move after the holidays and, of course, with the whole school to a little village on the Thames about 3 hours from London. There he will organize his school somewhat differently and perhaps enlarge it. Now I'm going to tell you about a walk we took yesterday. It was to an inlet of the sea, and the road thither, interesting word, not the road there, the road thither led through fields of young corn and along hedges of hawthorn, etc. Arriving there, we saw to our left a high steep ridge of sand and stone as tall as a two-story house. On the top of it were old gnarled hawthorn bushes whose black and grey moss-grown stems and branches were all bent to one side by the wind. There were also a few alder bushes. Sounds like he's describing Wuthering Heights. The ground on which we walked was covered all over with big grey stones, chalk and shells. To the right lay the sea, as calm as a pond, and reflecting the light of the transparent grey sky where the sun was setting. The tide was out and the water very low. Thanks for your letter of yesterday. I'm very glad that Willem Falkus is also an employee of the house. Now, can you imagine writing letters or even sending texts or WhatsApps, and almost without exception, every letter you send, you describe in detail the color of the sky, the fields that you see, you describe the landscape around you, like invariably in these communications with a sibling or a family member. I mean, we've got so much better and more effective communication at our disposal now, and we don't tend to do that. Our conversations are short, sharp, or some of ours, and to some extent quite empty. And look how rich this is. Look how rich it is with color and description and investment in, what he's doing. And you can't see the letters he's getting back, but you'd imagine there's a similar investment there. And it's not just that he writes the letter and then it's got to be posted and someone's got to pick it up along with a lot of other letters and carry it across the sea and then put it into another post box in the Netherlands. And yet so much effort goes into it. Where I'm just saying, we send a text, and how much effort do we put into that? How much less effort do we put into that? Have a pleasant day today, and give my love to all who may ask about me. Your loving brother, Vincent. One more, my best wishes, lad. I hope you will begin a happy and prosperous year. These are important years that we are living through now, and much depends on them. May everything come out all right. A hearty handshake, adieu. So remember, he's got a month to sort of prove himself, and then we'll see what is decided, whether he makes the grade in Mr. Stokes's mind. Dear Theo, this 1st of May, 1876 from Ramsgate. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter and for placing the advertisement. Did you find the postal order in the letter? Yesterday afternoon, the wind was so strong that Mr. Stokes wouldn't let the boys go out. I asked his permission for 6 of the biggest and myself to go for a short walk. We went down to the beach. The sea was very rough and it was not very easy to walk against the wind. We saw the lifeboat towed by a tug, returning from a mission to a ship that had run aground on a sandbank, but it didn't bring it off. I know that picture by Willems very well. The drawing by Mauve, which you write about, must be very beautiful. Did you ever go to his studio? You asked me what I teach the boys, mainly French basics. So he can speak French, he's teaching French. Only one student is starting the study of German, so he can also speak German. So if essentially at this point he can speak 4 languages, Dutch, French, German, and I guess English. He goes on to say, for the rest, a little of everything, mainly sums, examinations, their dictation, etc. So he's teaching them French, German, and maths to some extent. So for the present, there's nothing too complicated in all this, but it is not easy to see that what they are learning is what we are teaching them. And now today is your birthday. In thought, I give you a firm handshake and send you my very best wishes once more. Obviously, I have hours of supervision after school, so my time is pretty well taken up. Perhaps it will get more in the future. Last Saturday evening, I gave a bath to a half dozen of these young gentlemen, not because I was obliged to, but because that allowed us to be ready on time. I also tried to make them read. I have some books that are well suited for boys, The Wide, Wide World, etc. That's a book by Elizabeth Wetherell, I think. And now goodbye. Thanks for your letter, for placing the advertisement, and for sending the paper. Always your loving brother, Vincent. Postscript, one of these days you will receive some English hymn books. I shall mark a few poems in them. There are so many beautiful ones, and especially when heard often, one grows so fond of them. So a week later, letter from Vincent to Theo, Ramsgate, 6 to 8 May 1876. I think we'll do this letter, maybe 2 more. And that should bring us on to June, summer. Dear Theo, by the same mail, you will receive the 2 little books I promised you. I marked a few things in them, but you will find many other beautiful ones besides. But as I wrote to you already, one grows so fond of them, especially when one is in the country itself. It is again Saturday evening and the weather is lovely. The sea is calm. It is low tide. The sky is a subtle milky blue. Why must I know that sky, having been to England and Scotland and Ireland? I know that milky blue sky. It's very different from our bright blue sky here. Clear, bright blue sky. On the horizon, a hint of fog. All morning the weather was so nice. It was so clear there where I can now see the fog. The town has something very peculiar about it. Everywhere you can see the influence of the sea, but you can know that characteristic too, for one also finds it at The Hague and Scheveningen. Okay, I'm going to put I don't know why I struggle so much to pronounce it, but I'm going to put the name in chat so you can see it. And then I'm going to see if I can bring up so this is the Wikipedia page for Scheveningen. I think I'm getting it right. Thanks. Yeah, I must have forgot that it does have a sort of a fairground. It's got like a Ferris wheel. So when I was there, this was the sort of scene I saw from the beach. Although it was not sunny, or it was windy, and I think on the other day it was kind of cloudy because I went there twice. But yeah, that gives you an idea of what it looks like there. I don't see any pictures of those sand dunes, which I took photos of. It's quite weird. To me, the thing that was quite a strong feature of it were those dunes, and yet it's not here at all. Anyway, I'll see if I can fish out a photo for you. It is on my Instagram if you guys are interested. Okay. Do you go to see Uncle Cor now and then? Sometimes I have such a longing to see him. I wrote to him yesterday. Tell Mr. Tearstick something about the school year. Honestly, I've had some happy hours here, yet I don't have plain and complete confidence in this happiness, in this peace. And he emphasizes these words. He's saying, you know what, I've had some happy moments here, but I'm not feeling confidence in this happiness. I'll just put his words down here. The one may be the result of the other. Man rarely declares that he is satisfied. As soon as he finds that it goes too well, the sooner he thinks that it will not go well enough. But this is in parentheses. We must not talk about it, but continue quietly on our way. Spend a pleasant Sunday morning. Give my love to the Ruiz family. Your loving brother, Vincent. So he's already expressing reservations kind of a month after his arrival, kind of saying, not sure if this is what I want. And I don't know, when you hear about Vincent giving half a dozen boys a bath, it's sort of like, is that kind of the kind of guy that he is? You don't really get that sense from him. You also don't get the sense that he's a super social, extroverted type kind of thing. The other thing, that comes across in his letters is that he is quite cerebral and quite cultured and is into art and poems. And you've got to wonder how into art and poems and paintings and culture are 10 to 14-year-old boys, right? I think the answer is not very much. Okay, so now we had a letter from Vincent to Theo, Ramsgate, dated 12 May 1876. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter. I'm also fond of Tell Me the Old Story. I heard it sung for the first time one evening in Paris, in a little church where I often went. Number 12 is also very beautiful. I think he's referring to to hymns. Going to the next paragraph, it's quite an interesting thing that he says here quite explicitly. He writes, there is such a longing for religion among the people in the large cities. Many a worker in a factory or shop has had a strange, beautiful, and pious youth. But city life sometimes removes the early dew of morning. He's got that emphasized. Even so, the longing for the old story remains. What is at the bottom of the heart stays at the bottom of the heart. In one of his books, Eliot, that's George Eliot, describes the life of factory workers who have formed a little community and hold religious services in a chapel in Lantern Yard. And he says of it, it is the kingdom of God on earth, no more and no less. So Van Gogh's really getting the sense that in humble settings, in settings not of extravagance, but rather deprivation, there is this sort of holy, divine process underway. Terry Dean says, thank you, Nick and chat. This is absolutely mindful therapy. The stress of the day is washed away with a rolling landscape. I appreciate you all. Thanks a lot, Terry. And so he's getting this really profound sense that where he wants to be is in these modest, humble places where people are in a place of simplicity. Where they're trying to make their way and they're trying to remember the good things that are sort of in their hearts in a way. he says, what is at the bottom of the heart stays at the bottom of the heart. It's trying to access that part. He says, your plan of giving father and mother the farewell by Sade, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, is good. So that is settled. Wilhelmine will be there on May 21st. From your letter, I see you also intend to go. By all means, do so, boy, if it is possible. And if you noticed, he's not giving his brother so much advice anymore. He's not advising his brother what to eat, what to read. It's almost like he's gotten off his high horse. What a surprise it would be for them. Mother's last letter had a melancholy tone. In a word or two, she touched upon the necessity. I don't know why I'm struggling to speak here. The necessity of our being so far from home, and her eyes too are giving her trouble. Come, boy, brighten them once more by your presence on that day. This afternoon, Mr. Reed sent me a catalogue of the exhibition in London. And then he says goodbye, salutation, and then now we're on to the last letter of May, 31st May 1876. And looks like there's another sketch, but I must say the sketch, I suppose it's slightly different to the other one. Terry Dean says, the bottom of the heart are the things that entered there first. I think it's something like that. Thanks a lot, Mike. I think the bottom of the heart, like when you say, thank you from the bottom of my heart, it's that place of authenticity. It's that place of genuineness and sincerity. It's like the real you. I suppose you could also say it's your inner child. It's the most basic part of you. It's the part of you that is foundational to who you are. Okay, 31st May 1876, written from Ramsgate, and he has a sketch that's similar but not quite the same to the previous one that he did. Same setting in a way. Dear Theo, bravo in getting to Eton on May 21st. So happily 4 of the 6 children were at home. So, the Van Goghs are 6 children. He's not at home, and I think Anna's also not at home. It could be another sister. Father wrote to me at length how everything went on the day. Thanks also for your last letter. Did I write to you about the storm I watched recently? The sea was yellowish, especially close to the shore. Let me read that again. The sea was yellowish, especially close to the shore. On the horizon, a streak of light, and above it, immensely large, dark grey clouds, from which one could see the rain coming down in slanting streaks. The wind blew the dust from the little white path among the rocks into the sea, and shook the hawthorn bushes in bloom and the wallflowers that grow on the rocks. To the right, fields of young green corn, and in the distance the town, which, with its towers, mills, slate roofs, Gothic-style houses, and the harbour below, between 2 jetties sticking out into the sea, looked like the towns Albrecht Dürer used to etch. I watched the sea last Sunday night as well. So if you want to look at the scenes Albrecht Dürer, or Dürer, I'll just put his name there if you're just interested in checking it out. I watched the sea last night, Sunday as well. Everything was dark grey, but on the horizon the day was beginning to break. It was still very early, and yet a skylark was already singing, and the nightingales in the gardens by the sea. In the distance, the light from the lighthouse, the guardship, etc. So I don't know if you've noticed what is happening here is what he's seeing around him is like the most important news to report. He doesn't talk about a relationship he has with his boss. He doesn't talk about some of the kids that are amusing. He doesn't really talk about other people. It is totally dwarfed, overshadowed, overwhelmed by this visceral absorption he has of the light moving over the landscape, the weather moving over the landscape, the weather and the light changing and moving over the landscape, what that feels like, what that looks like. That is his experience of every day. That is principally and fundamentally what he's experiencing every day, not this person said this to me, I ate a sandwich or whatever. It's the visuals that are so front and center in his mind. And that's the bulk of these letters. He goes on to say, I watched, what does he say? It was still very early, and yet a skylark was already singing, and the nightingales in the gardens by the sea. Bridget, thanks a lot, from Australia. In the distance, the light from the lighthouse, the guardship, etc. That same night, I looked out of the window of my room at the roofs of the houses. The roofs of the houses. A single star, but a beautiful, big, friendly one. Now, what's quite ironic, I didn't expect this, but he talks about a single star, and right next to me, I've got a manuscript I wrote when I lived in England, and it's called Under the Star, and you can see the star there. I'm not going to do it, but I might do it in the next live that I do. But I'll tell you about my version of Van Gogh's journey that I experienced not once but twice. In other words, losing a job or struggling to get a job, and then you go to a foreign country. And I experienced it twice, both very, very different stories, but I'll kind of take you through it in the next live. So he talks about above the roofs, a single star, but a beautiful, big, friendly one. And I thought of us all, and I thought of my own years gone by and of our home. And these words and this sentiment sprang to my mind. Keep me from being a son who brings shame. Give me thy blessing, not because I deserve it, but for my mother's sake. Thou art love, cover all things. Without thy constant blessing, we succeed in nothing. Can you see how that sentiment is very strong with him, that he, as the eldest son, he doesn't want to bring shame to his family, to his, to his parents. He doesn't want to disappoint them, right? He's feeling that. He's feeling that what has happened, that he's been fired from his job and now he's where he is kind of shameful. And he's not in a very good place. Thanks a lot, Yvonne Phillips. Yvonne says, such a nice way to end my evening. You spoil us, Nick. This Van Gogh letter series was a great idea. Van Gogh's words have an even more refreshing effect on me than his paintings do, I think. Well, that's awesome. I think some of his paintings have got a strong magic to them, definitely. But you're right, his words are refreshing and his story interesting. Thanks a lot for that. Enclosed is a little drawing of the view from the school window through which the boys follow their parents with their eyes as they go back to the station after a visit. It's quite interesting, that image. The boys sitting in the building and just watching their parents walking home. Many a one will never forget the view from that window. You really ought to have seen it this week when we had days of rain, especially at dusk, when the lamps are lit and their light is reflected in the wet streets. So bear in mind, this is a time of or putting oil in your lamp. You know that song, give me oil in my lamp, keep it burning, burning, burning. Give me oil in my lamp, I pray, right? That oil was sometimes whale oil. And that's how the lamps are lit at this time, with oil, fish oil. And this is even before the advent of electricity. So something like a lit lamp is even something that is totally different, totally foreign to us who we used to, electricity. And a lamp like that would smell probably a certain way, and its light would flicker in a different way than we know. I must say I was very aware of the lamp post when I was in Aal. That's something different. Lining those really old corridors. He says, oh, this is interesting. He says, I think he's talking about when it's lots of days of rains. He says, on such days, Mr. Stokes can sometimes be in a bad temper, and if the boys make more of a noise than he likes, they occasionally have to go without their bread and tea in the evening. You ought to see them looking out of the window then. There is something so melancholy about it. They have so little apart from their meals to look forward to, and to see them through from one day to the next. So you kind of have this, I must say it's quite poetic the way he describes it. You have the weather being foul for days on end, and all these kids stuck together, and that eventually causes the sort of headmaster to become ill-tempered, and then the boys are like chastened, and then they must sort of not chastened, chastised, and then they must sort of just wait for like, when's the weather going to change so that the mood of this dude that we're stuck with is also going to change. And then this is our lot in life. And Vincent's looking at this and he's saying, this is their lot in life, but it's actually also his lot in life. Nisi, thanks a lot. Glad you could make it, eh? Glad that you are here. So he's kind of saying the only thing that these kids have got to look forward to is like the next meal. And that's going to see them through from one day to the next. I wish you could also see them going down the dark stairs and through the narrow passage to where they have their dinner. The sun does shine pleasantly in there. Another peculiar place is a room with a rotten floor where there are 6 basins in which they wash, and a dim light is all that reaches the washstand through the broken panes of the window. Now, if you think about it, as someone who's written a lot of books myself, as a narrator, as a writer, as a storyteller, Van Gogh's letters have got virtually zero dialogue. There's virtually nothing of, I said this to that guy said this to me, or I eavesdropped on the conversation and X said that, Y said that, whatever. There's nothing like that. He describes it very much in the third person, even though he's there. Even when he's describing people moving and people doing whatever they're doing, he's describing it descriptively. He's describing it visually. He's not describing it kind of in a social sense. He's not describing what is being said. He's not he's not listening. He's seeing. Right? He's not listening, he's seeing. Now, you might say, whatever you want to say about it, you might say, well, he is, that's his focus. But the other side to that is he does provide some of the dialogue, some of the quotes, some of the expressions, which is in inverted commas, from poems, Bible verses, books, and whatnot. But he's not doing that with people. He's paying attention to what is being said by God and by the names of paintings and by poets, but not by people. Did you notice that? It's kind of a funny observation. Then he says, the youngsters have made an oil stain on your little drawing. Please forgive them. Enclosed a few lines for Uncle Jan, and now good night. Should anyone ask after me, my greetings to them. Do you still visit Borchers from time to time? If you see him, remember me to him, as well as to Willem Volkers, and everybody at the Roosters. A handshake in my thoughts from your loving Vincent. So I think I'm going to read one more, and that'll take us into June. Oh, no, I'm not going to. The next letter is from the Van Gogh family to Theo from Zundert. I'm not going to go through that. It's a couple of letters. And I think it's the one after that is then from Ramsgate in June. We'll deal with that in the Van Gogh letters episode 5, which we'll do on Wednesday. If things go, if nothing else comes up. So that is it. I think it's been quite an interesting journey. Things are definitely changing, and it definitely is interesting. Bridget says, Vincent is incredibly poetic, but yes, you're right. He never, ever retells any dialogue. It kind of makes you kind of wonder, does anyone ever talk to him, or does he ever talk to somebody else? Or is that part just extremely dull? Is it just like, take this book to that room, go and close that door? You know what I mean? Like just incredibly banal things that, is that really... And so you can kind of get the sense that he probably does want to have deep conversations, but who on earth can he talk to there about art and poetry? And it probably isn't really too many people. Stephanie says, our loving Vincent, an appropriate ending to tonight. Nisi says, thank you, Nick, Steph, and everyone. Stephanie, thanks for being the mod in charge today, the only mod, I think. Thanks to all the members who are here. Thanks to the 36 of you who are watching right now, 37. All the members, see you guys have been very chatty. Lots of chatter here. Mike says, I want to go to an art museum now. Just looking at some of your comments. Robbie Robbins says, being fired is mortifying. Well, I was fired and then I went to Australia, and that's a story I still want to tell you guys. Terry Dean says, next delivery is creative and genuine while remaining humble. Thanks a lot for that. Robbie Robbins says, thank you so much all. Really enjoyed this, especially as I could not sleep. Well, glad to be of help. Right now it's 5:41 in the morning. The sun comes up, I think, in an hour from now. So I presume you guys are getting ready for the nap on that side of the world. But yeah, the sun's going to be coming up here quite soon. At the moment, I'm in a bit of a disrupted sleep cycle, awake pretty much through the night, trying to sleep sort of from midday onwards. It's a bit of a mess, but anyway, it certainly helps me work more. Once I'm in a proper cycle, I'll probably work a bit less. I'm working a bit more than I otherwise would, I think. Stephanie says it's 11:41, quite late, so I'm going to let you go. Bridget says it's 1:41 here. Bridget's in Australia, so while it's middle of the day, almost the middle of the day in Australia, and it's almost the middle of the night in Connecticut, and it's almost, the sun's almost coming up where I am. Sun's going to start coming up. Robbie Robbins says it's 4:42. Is that in the UK? Jean Karras says, I've been in and out tonight, but always enjoy the chat. Yeah, great group. Great hearing from you, Jean. When I did my live on, not my live, the thing on Barry Morphew. I don't know, I just feel like I know Colorado so well, just having covered so many cases in Colorado. That's definitely a state I feel I've got to go to, not just for true crime, but to hike, to mountain bike, to ski, to go to the Great Sand Dunes, whatever. Terry Dean says, how's the ivy versus birds going? Don't laugh, but I didn't really even kick her out. Like, I didn't say I've had enough of this, but basically my girlfriend was just like, I need my cat, right? And I just sort of felt like, cheapers, my garden needs a break from the slaughter, because if it's not a bird, it's a little lizard, or it's a mouse, and I don't mind a mouse, but the other stuff a little bit more. And so it's just like, cheapers, the carnage cannot go on. And fortunately, my girlfriend was just like, I miss my cat, I want my cat. And I was like, you can take your cat. And then she's had her cat for about a week, but now the cat's like, I need to get out of here. And so the cat's back. So she's quite happy, but I'm going to be quite strict about, she can go out certain times, which, she's not, just almost like she's heard me. So almost like she heard me talking about her. And she's walked under there she goes. Can you see? Ivy. I don't know if you could see that, but that was Ivy. It's like quite weird. I'm talking about her, and then there she is. Did I maybe say her name? I think she does know her name. But anyway, so she's here, and she's always a good. So there she's walking out the room. Ivy. Hello. There's actually a portrait of Van Gogh on that wall, if you've never seen it before. Okay, that's it from me. Timmy, can I get you where you need to go? Okay. Thanks a lot to you guys. I just want to thank you guys for the super chats as well. Really appreciate it. Sleep well, guys. Have a great week, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Take care.